Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the letter, the paper crinkling under her grip. A year had passed since her son David's funeral, since she had buried him under a polished headstone in the quiet corner of Willowbrook Cemetery. The grief had never left her. It clung like a shadow, tightening around her throat every time she passed his empty room. But now, this letter, delivered anonymously, had shattered the fragile peace she'd tried to rebuild. "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm not dead. Dig up my grave. The truth is inside." The words blurred as her vision swam with tears. It was David's handwriting, uneven, rushed, as if scribbled in panic. Her mind spun. Was this a cruel joke? A trick? But the letter continued, mentioning things only David would know. The childhood treehouse, the lullaby she used to sing, the scar on his knee from a bike accident at 12. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, Emily stood over David's grave, a shovel in her hands. Her brother Mark, a retired detective, stood beside her, his jaw set. This is insane," he muttered, but he dug anyway, his muscles straining against the weight of the earth. When the coffin lid creaked open, Emily's breath caught. It was empty. No body, no remains. Just a metal box, tucked where David's chest should have been. Inside, a stack of documents, a burner phone, and a single note. "They're watching. Trust no one." Mark's flashlight flickered over the papers. Blueprints, encrypted codes, and a name circled in red ink. Victor Crane. The wind howled through. The trees, as Emily and Mark huddled in the dim glow of the flashlight, the grave's dirt still fresh on their clothes. The documents in the metal box were a labyrinth of coded messages, bank transfers, and surveillance photos, each one more unsettling than the last. One page stood out. A flight manifest, showing David had flown to Montenegro just weeks before, his supposed death. Another was a blurred photo of a man with sharp features and ice-cold eyes, Victor Crane, standing beside a government official whose face had been hastily scratched out. Emily's pulse pounded as she flipped through the files, her fingers brushing against a USB drive hidden beneath the papers. When Mark plugged it into his laptop, the screen flickered to life, revealing a video. David's face appeared, gaunt and haunted, his voice a whisper. "Mom, if you're seeing this, I had to disappear. Crane's people are everywhere. Cops, lawyers, even the coroner who signed my death certificate. They faked it all. I found something I wasn't supposed to see. They're not just criminals, they're architects. They don't just steal money, they steal lives." The screen cut to a series of encrypted files, names, dates, locations, before the video abruptly ended. Mark exhaled sharply. "This isn't just some gang, Em. This is organized power, and David was trying to expose it." Emily's hands shook as she picked up the burner phone, scrolling through the contacts. Only one number was saved, untitled, unsaved, just a string of digits. She pressed call. It rang once, twice, then a voice distorted and mechanical. "You weren't supposed to find the box now they know you have it. Don't go home, don't trust anyone, follow the signs." The line went dead. Emily and Mark exchanged a glance. They were already being hunted. That night, as they drove to a motel under fake names, Emily noticed a black SUV trailing them a few cars back. When Mark took a sudden turn, the SUV matched their move. They were being followed. He slammed the accelerator, weaving through back streets until the headlights finally disappeared. But as they checked into the motel, Emily noticed something else. A symbol etched into the corner of David's documents. A small, intricate crow. She remembered it from years ago. David had doodled it in his notebook as a teenager, calling it the Watcher's Mark. Was it a coincidence? Or was David trying to lead them somewhere? The last page in the file held a clue, a single address scribbled in haste. 23 Rue des Ombres, Geneva. The address in Geneva wasn't just a clue, It was a trap door into a world Emily couldn't have imagined, a labyrinth of shadows where every corner held another piece of the nightmare David had been living. The apartment building stood like a rotten tooth in the mouth of the city, its stairwells smelling of mildew and something sharper, something like fear made physical. When they picked the lock, because of course Mark still carried those tools, old habits clinging like the scent of gunpowder on a retired cop's hands, the apartment yawned before them like an open grave, dust swirling in their flashlight beams. The furniture all wrong, positioned not for living, but for waiting. The desk was the only thing that looked used, its surface scarred by cigarette burns and the frantic tapping of fingers that knew time was running out. The typewriter still held its final message, the letters punched so hard they'd nearly torn through the paper, and as Emily read David's words about Crane's network trading not just secrets but people, her stomach turned to lead. Behind the false wall, which gave way too easily, like the whole building was just a stage set waiting to collapse, they found the proof, passports with David's face but strangers' names, each one a life he'd been forced to wear like a stolen coat. The maps were worse. The red X's weren't just locations. They were wounds on the skin of Europe, places where people vanished into Crane's machine. But it was the smaller map that stopped Emily's breath. The village in Montenegro, circled like a target, with David's handwriting spidering across the margins. They take you apart here. They make you forget your own name. The ink was smudged. In one spot, maybe by sweat, maybe by something else, and Emily didn't want to think about what kind of pain could make a man's hands shake that badly. Then the floor creaked, not the settling groan of an old building, but the deliberate, weight-shifting sound of someone who thought they were being quiet. Mark's head snapped up, his cop instincts flaring like a struck match, but the door exploded inward before he could move. The masked men moved like a single organism, their guns sweeping the room in practiced arcs, and the leader's voice was all wrong, too calm, like he'd done this 1,000 times before. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, and in that moment, Emily understood this wasn't just about David anymore. They were part of the story now. The man's gloved finger tightened on the trigger, and then the world shattered into gunfire. Not from the intruders, but from the hallway. The first masked man dropped without a sound. The second got off half a scream before the second bullet took him in the throat. The leader turned, his gun coming up, but the fourth shot caught him. Between the eyes, his mask blooming sudden and red. And there, framed in the doorway with smoke curling from his pistol like a living thing, stood a ghost. His clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been muscular, his face all sharp angles where there used to be laughter lines. But the eyes, those were David's eyes, even if they'd seen things no one should ever see. He didn't smile. Didn't say, "Mom." Just looked at them with something like grief and said, "You weren't supposed to find me yet. Now they'll never stop coming." The safe house smelled of antiseptic and stale sweat, the kind of place where people went to either heal or die. David moved through the dimly lit room like a man who had forgotten how to trust light, his shoulders hunched as if still bracing for a blow. Emily wanted to reach out, to pull him into the kind of hug that could erase years of pain, but the way he flinched when Mark shifted too suddenly told her that version of her son was gone. Maybe forever. He sat on the edge of a cot, the springs groaning under his weight, and when he rolled up his sleeves to clean the fresh graze along his forearm, Emily saw the scars. Not the neat lines of surgical procedures, but the jagged, uneven marks of someone who had been taken apart and stitched back together wrong. "They called it conditioning," David said, not looking up as he dabbed at the wound with alcohol. "Not torture. Never torture. Torture is for people who still have something left to break." His voice was flat, the way people sound when they're reciting facts too terrible to feel anymore. The story came out in pieces, like pages torn from a book and scattered. David had been working deep in Crane's cyber division, designing systems to hack into government databases when he stumbled onto the real operation. Not just data theft, but a marketplace. They weren't selling information, he said, fingers tapping a restless rhythm against his knee. They were selling access, to politicians, to military systems, to the people who could make whole countries disappear with a signature. When he tried to copy the files, Crane's security flagged him. They gave him a choice: vanish into their system as a permanent asset, or watch his mother die in a car accident so clean no one would question it. So David chose the third option. He faked his own death, left the trail of breadcrumbs only Emily would follow, and went to ground in Montenegro, where Crane's men couldn't reach him. Or so he'd thought. "They've got eyes everywhere," he muttered, dragging a hand through hair that had grown too long, too wild. "Cops, journalists, even the guy who stamps your passport at the airport, and now they know you're digging." Emily's chest ached. This wasn't the boy she'd raised, the one who'd built tree forts and laughed at bad puns. This was someone who had learned to sleep with one eye open, who checked the exits before sitting down, who heard threats in the silence between words. But when she reached for his hand, his fingers curled around hers with a desperation that said some part of him was still there, still hers. "We can fix this," she said, and for the first time David looked at her like he wanted to believe it. Then the window shattered. The bullet meant for David's skull embedded itself in the wall behind him. Mark was moving before the echo of the gunshot faded, shoving Emily to the floor as another round splintered the doorframe. David didn't freeze. He lunged for the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and when he spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. "They're here for the files, and for me." Glass crunched underfoot outside. Too many footsteps. Too close. "There's a tunnel," David whispered, yanking up a loose floorboard to reveal a narrow passage. "It leads to the river. Go. I'll hold them off." Emily's grip on his arm tightened. "Not without you," she said, and something in her voice must have reached him, because after a heartbeat, he nodded. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and rusted metal, the walls so narrow they scraped their shoulders as they ran. Behind them, the safe house erupted in gunfire. David didn't look back. The riverbank was slick with mud and the kind of darkness that clung to the skin like a second shadow, the water rushing past in a furious whisper that drowned out the sounds of pursuit. For now, David knelt in the reeds, his hands steady as he pried open a rusted metal box hidden beneath a flat stone, revealing a waterproof case containing a laptop, a stack of burner phones, and a single USB drive encased in a tiny Faraday pouch to block signals. "This is everything," he said, his voice barely audible over the river's growl. "Enough to burn Crane's empire to the ground. If we can get it out." Emily watched as her son's fingers flew over the laptop keys, pulling up files that made no sense to her. Strings of code, surveillance photos of high-ranking officials in compromising positions, financial trails leading to offshore accounts with sums so large they seemed imaginary. Mark exhaled sharply when a particular document loaded, showing a list of names with dates beside them, some marked acquired, others terminated. "Jesus," Mark muttered, "this isn't just blackmail, this is a goddamn hit list." David didn't look up, his face lit only by the eerie blue glow of the screen. "Crane doesn't just sell secrets, he sells control. And the people on this list? They were either bought or buried." The plan was desperate, but it was all they had. David had spent months setting up deadman switches, encrypted packets rigged to release if he didn't reset them every 48 hours. Some were set to go to journalists, others to intelligence agencies, a few to the darkest corners of the internet, where no government could scrub them away. "The problem," David said, wiping rain from his forehead, "is that Crane knows about most of them by now. His hackers have been playing whack-a-mole with my fail-safes for weeks, but there's one he hasn't found." He tapped a final file, this one labeled only with a string of numbers. "This one's wired to a satellite server. Untraceable, unstoppable, but it needs a physical key." He held up the USB drive. "And it has to be uploaded from a specific location, a data hub in Prague. If we can get there, if we can plug this in, the whole thing goes live. Every dirty secret, every paid-off official, every body they've buried. Emily's stomach twisted. Prague was hundreds of miles away, through checkpoints and borders crawling with Crane's people. The burner phone in David's pocket buzzed, a single word flashing on the screen. Compromised. They were out of time. Somewhere in the trees behind them, a branch snapped. Too loud to be an animal. David snapped the laptop shut and shoved everything back into the case. We need to move. Now. They followed the river downstream, keeping to the shallows where the water would mask their footprints. Every shadow seemed to writhe with potential threats, every distant engine growl a possible patrol. At dawn, they stumbled upon an abandoned boathouse, its wood rotting but still standing. Inside, beneath a moldy tarp, they found a dinghy with a silent electric motor. "This'll get us to the next town," David said, checking the battery. "From there, we can—" A gunshot split the air. The dinghy's hull exploded in a shower of splinters. Down. Mark tackled Emily as more shots rang out, bullets chewing through the boathouse walls. David crouched behind an overturned crate, returning fire with a pistol Emily didn't know he had. "There's too many," he shouted over the gunfire. "Take the case. Follow the river east. There's a train yard." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. "We're not leaving you." David's smile was grim. "You have to. The key's more important than me now." Then he did something Emily would remember for the rest of her life. He stepped into the open, firing wildly, drawing their pursuers' attention. "Go!" The train yard sprawled before them like a graveyard of steel and shadows, the skeletal remains of freight cars stretching into the pre-dawn gloom, their rusted hulls groaning in the wind as if whispering warnings to stay away. Emily clutched, the waterproof case to her chest, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. Not just the physical burden of its contents, but the crushing knowledge that David had sacrificed himself to get it here, that the last she'd seen of her son was him, standing in a hail of gunfire, his body a shield between them and the men who wanted this data erased from existence. Mark moved like a ghost beside her, his breathing controlled but his eyes wild with a mixture of grief and fury, his fingers twitching toward the pistol tucked into his waistband, a weapon they both knew wouldn't be enough if Crane's men caught up to them here. The air smelled of oil and damp concrete, the scent clinging to the back of Emily's throat as they darted between boxcars, their footsteps swallowed by the distant thunder of an approaching storm. Somewhere in the maze of tracks a train hissed to life, its engine a low, vibrating growl that set the ground trembling beneath their feet. "That's our ride," Mark muttered, nodding toward the glow of headlights cutting through the mist. A freight train, its cars marked with shipping logos, bound for Prague if the fated schedule pinned to the yard office was still accurate. They waited in the lee of a shipping container, watching as workers in reflective vests moved lazily through, their pre-departure checks, their voices muffled by the rising wind. The moment the crew turned their backs, Mark and Emily lunged for the nearest open car, scrambling into the gap between crates just as the train gave a shuddering lurch forward. The space was cramped, reeking of stale wood and diesel, but it was concealment, for now. Emily pressed her back against the rough slats of a pallet, her fingers trembling as she unzipped the case. The laptop's screen flared to life, casting jagged blue shadows across their faces. David's final instructions blinked on the screen. A map of Prague with a single building highlighted, an address, and a time, 19 Bixiu, next to a string of characters that looked like random keystrokes but was undoubtedly another layer of encryption. "He planned this all along," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "He knew it would come to this." Mark didn't answer, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle twitching. Outside, the train picked up speed, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks a grim counterpoint to the storm brewing on the horizon. But they weren't safe yet. A metallic clang echoed from somewhere deeper in the car, too deliberate to be the train's movement. Emily froze. Mark's hand closed over the pistol. The crates shifted. Then a voice. "You're harder to kill than Crane thought." A figure stepped into the dim light. Not a uniformed enforcer, not another faceless mercenary. A woman. Late 30s, her dark hair pulled into a tight braid, her face all sharp angles, and calculating calm. She held no weapon, but the way she moved suggested she didn't need one. "Alexa," Mark breathed, the name a curse and a recognition all at once. The woman from Montenegro. The journalist who'd helped them before. Or had she? Emily's stomach dropped. "You led them to us," she accused, the pieces slotting into place. The two convenient safe houses. The trails that always seemed to end just before they were cornered. Alexa's smile was thin, humorless. "I led you," she corrected. "Them, I delayed. But time's up. Crane's offering a new bounty, one that even I can't ignore." She extended a hand. "Give me the drive. I'll make sure your deaths are quick." Mark's pistol was up in an instant, but Alexa was faster. A flick of her wrist and a knife gleamed in the half-light, pressed to Emily's throat before either of them could blink. "Don't," Alexa warned, her breath hot against Emily's ear. "I like you, I really do, but I like breathing more." Emily could feel the blade's edge, cold and precise, against her pulse. Somewhere beyond the walls of the train, thunder rolled, the storm finally breaking. Rain hammered against the roof like impatient fingers. Then the train screamed to a stop. The impact sent them sprawling. Alexa's knife grazed Emily's collarbone, a hot line of pain, but Mark was already moving, tackling the journalist into a stack of crates. Wood splintered. The laptop skidded across the floor, its screen cracking but still glowing stubbornly. Outside, shouts erupted. Boots pounded on gravel. Crane's men. They'd been found. Alexa swore, wrenching free of Mark's grip. "Idiots," she snarled. "You've killed us all." But even as she said it, she was yanking open the car's side door, revealing not the expected swarm of armed men, but a single figure standing in the rain-slicked darkness, backlit by the yard's floodlights. David, bloodied, breathing hard, alive. "Mom," he gasped, swaying on his feet. "We have to go. Right now." Behind him, the first gunshots rang out. The rain fell in sheets now, a torrential downpour that turned the train yard into a shifting nightmare of blurred lights and echoing shouts. The water sluicing off David's shoulders as he staggered toward them. One arm clamped around his ribs where his shirt was dark with blood, his free hand outstretched not for balance but for the case. The drive, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity that made Emily's breath catch. Behind him, figures moved through the storm, their shapes distorted by the rain, the muzzle flashes of their weapons stuttering like faulty neon signs. Alexa didn't hesitate. She lunged for the laptop, her fingers closing around the cracked screen just as Mark's bullet grazed her shoulder, spinning her into the crates with a snarl of pain. David didn't flinch at the gunfire. He just kept moving, his voice raw and ragged as he shouted over the storm, "The hub! It's not in Prague. It's here, in the yard. Crane's men are already rerouting the servers, if we don't upload. Now, the window closes." Emily's mind reeled. The detour, the stop. It hadn't been an ambush. It had been a diversion. Crane's people scrambling to cut the last thread David had left dangling. The freight office loomed ahead, a squat building, with flickering fluorescence bleeding through its grimy windows. David led the charge, his gait uneven but relentless, kicking open the door to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Monitors stacked haphazardly on folding tables, cables snaking across the floor like veins, and in the center of it all, a server, rack humming ominously, its lights blinking a rhythmic green. A technician in a headset looked up, his face draining of color as David leveled his pistol. "Out," David ordered, and the man bolted without a word. Mark took up position at the door, his gun trained on the storm-darkened yard where shadows were converging, their movements too coordinated, too precise. Alexa appeared in the doorway, her braid unraveling, her knife still in hand. She didn't attack, just locked eyes with David and said, "You're burning the world down with you." David didn't look away as he slotted the USB drive into the server. "Good," he said and hit enter. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the screens exploded with light, a cascade of windows popping open faster than the eye could follow. Documents, videos, encrypted chats spilling across every surface. Unstoppable, irreversible. Somewhere in the world, politicians would be waking to panicked phone calls. Bank accounts would be freezing. Arrest warrants would be issued. Crane's empire was crumbling in real time. The first bullet took Mark in the shoulder, spinning him into the wall. The second would have taken David between the eyes if Alexa hadn't moved, interposing herself with the sniper's calm, her body jerking as the round punched through her chest. She collapsed without a sound. David caught her, lowering her to the floor as the room erupted in gunfire, his hands slick with her blood. "Why?" he demanded, his voice cracking. Alexa's smile was faint, bloody. "I owed you," she whispered, "for Montenegro." Then her gaze shifted to Emily, something almost like apology in her eyes before they went still. The gunfire ceased as abruptly as it had begun. A voice rang out from the yard. "Crane's down. The data's live. It's over." Emily knelt beside her son, her hands trembling as they hovered over his wounds, over Alexa's body, over Mark's labored breathing. The server's lights continued to blink, indifferent. David sagged against her, his head heavy on her shoulder. "It's done," he murmured. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Somewhere beyond the yard, a siren wailed. The grave was different this time. No empty coffin. No secrets festering beneath the soil. Just a simple headstone, its inscription catching the light of a setting sun. "In memory of lies buried and truth uncovered. Love survives death." Emily traced the letters with her fingers, the grass cool beneath her knees. Behind her, David shifted on his crutches, his wounds healing but his eyes still haunted. Mark stood at his side, his arm in a sling, his gaze scanning the horizon out of habit. They were alive. They were free. But as Emily rose, she caught the way David's hand strayed to his pocket, to the burner phone he still carried, just in case. Some shadows never really faded. The wind stirred the flowers she'd planted. Somewhere, a bird sang. Life, stubborn and relentless, went on.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.